All women are different, but they are all women. This video is androcentric from a men's point of view and is presented as opinion, commentary, and debate. Expressing opinions is not violence. These are ideas to challenge, question, and argue in public, because classical liberalism relies on the First Amendment for its dialectic. If you are a feminist, then consider this. If patriarchy truly existed as claimed, feminism could not. And if all men are trash and women are equal to men, then what are we to conclude? Women will die for their children, men will die for their wives and children, and God chose to die for all mankind. Authority rolls up with responsibility. If this framing of facts offends you, click off to a cute cat video. Proceeding further will expose you to gamma bias and criticism directed at ideas, claims, institutions, not at any individual's virtue or dignity. Our method follows the 7 liberal arts, the trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. If this framework is not for you, feel free to exit now. It's no disgrace. Women are wonderful. God bless America. Men are great. Performativity Psychosis, Solipsism, Standpoint, Epistemology, and Karen's Female Supremacist Satanic Marxism, written by Conrad Riker, available now. Links in description. The Steele Test, How Stress, Fatherhood, Art, and Empire Reveal the Death of Men and the Rise of the Red-Pilled West. You know what I did last Tuesday? I watched a man weep because his barista misspelled his name on a 4 oat milk latte. His hands trembled, his voice cracked. "This is trauma," he said into a phone recording for HR Trauma, from a typo. Meanwhile, my grandfather walked off a battlefield in Normandy with shrapnel in his leg and said, "Dinner, still on." That's the rot we're up against. A civilization that once forged saints, scientists, and swordsmen now produces emotional toddlers who sue their neighbors for vibes. And who's to blame? Not some shadowy cabal of men in suits. No, the enemy is softer, slicker, and wears yoga pants. It's the gynocentric lie pumped into boys like estrogen-laced tap water, turning testosterone into tears, turning duty into self-care Sundays. You've been conditioned to believe stress breaks you, but it doesn't. It reveals you like fire testing gold. When the world leans on you, when the job, the kids, the bills, the ex-wife trying to take your children, that's when you find out if you're iron or foil. And the courts, they've rigged the game 70% custody to mothers, not because they're better parents, but because feminist ideology colonized the law like a parasite. A father can pay $3,000 a month to see his kids 3 weekends a year. If the ex allows it, that's not family law. That's emotional blackmail with a judicial stamp. And while they're auctioning off fatherhood, they preach reparations to countries that never enslaved anyone, while ignoring the real plunder, the plunder of men's lives, their labor, their legacy. A Ghanaian immigrant in London drives an Uber 80 hours a week, sends money home, prays 5 times a day, builds a business. Then some Oxford Marxist tells him he owes colonial debt to a system that let him escape tribal warlords. Don't buy it. The West didn't rise by theft. It rose by truth, by logic, by cathedrals, constitutions, and calculus. While others buried knowledge, we built libraries. While others burned witches, we launched telescopes. And now we're told to kneel for a lie, that men are toxic. That fatherhood is optional. That creativity is problematic. If it's not feminist-approved finger painting, nonsense. Real men create. They don't whine. They don't process feelings in group hugs. They build, they lead, they endure. And when the system tries to break them, they bend like a Roman sword, never break. The forge of resilience, measuring a man by his stress response. Hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times create weak men. And weak men create hard times. That quote from G.K. Chesterton isn't just prophetic. It's the autopsy report on Western civilization. I watched a man last week drive 90 minutes each way to a job paying 6 figures, raise 4 children with a wife who'd rather text her gal pals than cook dinner, work 70-hour weeks without a single complaint, and still find time to grill steaks on Sundays while teaching his son how to change oil. He doesn't whine about work-life balance. He lives it without needing a therapist to validate his feelings. Contrast that with the beta orbiters at the coffee shop, sobbing into their oat milk lattes about toxic productivity and emotional labor, demanding safe spaces from spreadsheets. These men aren't just weak, they've been weaponized by a gynocentric cult that rewards fragility and punishes fortitude. I once studied the journals of Marcus Aurelius during a plague that killed a third of Rome's population, while waging war on 3 fronts. His response: the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Meanwhile, modern men collapse at the first sign of inconvenience, delayed flights, a rude DM, their fantasy football team losing. We've medicalized stress into trauma, pathologizing the very mechanism that forged Spartans, founders, and frontiersmen. The CDC reports that 75% of men under 30 feel overwhelmed regularly. Overwhelmed by what? Choosing between avocado toast and cold brew. This isn't biology, it's indoctrination. A generation raised by helicopter moms and feminist school teachers now interprets mild discomfort as systemic oppression. They're not broken, they've been rebuilt to fail. Let's talk about the agoj, the Spartan system that dropped boys into the wild at age 7, armed with nothing but a knife and a mission to survive. They were beaten, starved, and forced to fight. Not because Sparta hated children, but because it loved civilization enough to demand warriors. Today, we have trigger warnings on Shakespeare. We hand out participation trophies for showing up. We've replaced stoicism with solipsism, where every man-child believes his feelings are facts, and his discomfort is a human rights violation. The agoge produced Leonidas. Our modern education produces Karens entitled, hysterical, and utterly defenseless when reality punches back. Navy SEAL BUDS training has an 80% dropout rate. 80%. These aren't weaklings, they're college athletes, Marines, Ivy Leaguers, but when faced with freezing water, sleep deprivation, and relentless physical agony, most quit. Why? Because they were never taught to suffer. They were raised in a culture that treats stress like a disease instead of the forge of character. Feminized parenting, where every scrape is a crisis, every failure a catastrophe, has engineered a generation allergic to adversity. And yet, when the world burns, it won't be the cry-bullies who rebuild it. It'll be the men who understand that stress isn't the enemy, it's the test. The trivium, logic, rhetoric, grammar was once the foundation of a free mind. Now it's been hijacked by critical theory cultists who claim lived experience trumps reason. Nonsense. Your feelings don't redefine gravity. A woman's truth doesn't alter the fact that 50% of marriages end in divorce, 70% of child abuse is committed by mothers or mother figures, or that men commit 80% of suicides because men internalize pain. While women externalize it, this isn't misogyny, it's data. Feminism didn't liberate women, it infantilized them, turning adulthood into a performance of victimhood. And men? We've been cuckolded, literally and figuratively. 30% of men are raising children that aren't theirs, while family courts routinely strip fathers of custody, access, and dignity. The system isn't broken. It's designed to punish masculine responsibility. Stress isn't the problem. The problem is a culture that treats masculinity like a pathology. The woke church preaches that resilience is toxic, that endurance is oppressive, that strength is something to be dismantled. They'd rather have men weep in therapy than win in life, but nature doesn't care about your feelings. The wolf doesn't spare the weak calf because it's sensitive. Reality is indifferent to your safe space. And when the grid fails, when the economy collapses, when the mob comes, no one will hand you a participation trophy. They'll look for the man who can lead, protect, and endure. Not the one who needed a counselor to get through a pop quiz. You want freedom? Start by dropping the lie that comfort is a right. Stress is not your enemy, it's your teacher. Every hardship you endure without breaking makes you more real, more true, more free. The left fears strong men because strong men cannot be controlled. They can't be guilted into submission, shamed into silence, or bribed with virtue signals. A man who has faced real suffering, war, loss, failure, lacks at microaggressions. He doesn't need pronouns to feel valid. He doesn't need diversity training to know right from wrong. He knows deep in his bones that character is forged in fire, not in therapy circles. And when the next dark age comes, and it won't be the Karens or the cry-bullies who save civilization. It'll be the silent men who endured, adapted, and conquered. That's not theory, that's history. And it's waiting for you to answer the call. I've spent years studying the philosophical rot that has infected our institutions, the performative narcissism, the solipsistic rage, the satanic inversion of truth, where motherhood is weaponized and fatherhood criminalized. I've dissected the feminist epistemology of victimhood, exposed the Marxist framing of gender war, and traced the ideological serpent back to its Frankfurt School lair. But no amount of logic, no syllogism, no appeal to natural law hits harder than the raw, bleeding reality of a father locked out of his child's life, billed like a subscription service, dismissed like a defective appliance. That's where the theory becomes flesh. That's where the ideology shows its true face, not in a lecture hall, but in a courtroom, in a child's confused eyes, in a man's silent scream, as he signs another child's support check for a home he's banned from entering. The theft of fatherhood, how feminist law eviscerates paternal rights. $2,500 a month. That's what I pay for the privilege of occasionally seeing my own child, assuming the judge, the social worker, and my ex's latest boyfriend all agree it's safe. That's not hyperbole. That's the opening line of an email I received last Tuesday from a man named Daniel, a software engineer from Austin, who now lives in a studio apartment because the system demands he fund 2 households while being treated as an ATM with a heartbeat. He hasn't seen his daughter in person for 8 months. No abuse, no neglect. Just a bitter divorce, a feminist-aligned judge, and a family court system so rotten with gender bias, it makes the Spanish Inquisition look like a mediation workshop. Daniel's case isn't rare, it's typical. And if you're a man, it could be yours. Consider James, a real man I interviewed, a former Marine who once walked through fire so others could live. He taught his son to swim, to ride a bike, to say sir and ma'am. When his wife left, he fought not for assets, but for time, for the right to read bedtime stories, to attend school plays, to be a father. The courts responded by slapping him with a restraining order based on a fabricated abuse claim. No evidence, no hearing, just a signature, a sob story, and a gavel. His ex later admitted in a text message caught by discovery that she lied to get leverage. But by then, James was locked out, bankrupted by legal fees, and labeled a high-conflict parent for daring to demand his constitutional rights. This is not justice. This is legalized kidnapping dressed up in rainbow ribbons and the child's best interest platitudes. Let's talk numbers, since facts are the kryptonite of feminist fantasy. 40% of American children grow up without a father in the home, not because fathers abandoned them, but because the law, funded by your tax dollars, removed them. 40%. That's not a statistic, that's a holocaust of the household, and it's been engineered by no-fault divorce laws, maternal presumption statutes, and a feminist ideology that views men not as parents, but as paychecks. And don't let anyone gaslight you into believing this is about protecting children if that were true. Why is primary custody awarded to the mother in 70% of cases, regardless of the father's fitness, stability, or devotion? Why are fathers 3 times more likely to be falsely accused of abuse during custody battles? Why does the US have one of the highest rates of paternity fraud, up to 30% in some studies, meaning tens of thousands of men are paying child support for children who are not biologically theirs? This isn't family law, it's family warfare. The historical lie is that patriarchy was oppressive. No, patriarchy was protective. It was the father who stood at the gate with a sword, who worked the fields in rain and drought, who taught his son's honor and his daughter's modesty. But radical feminism didn't want equality, it wanted supremacy. So they launched a propaganda campaign, the deadbeat dad caricature, the toxic masculinity smear. The men are disposable dogma. They turned fatherhood into a joke and then sued men for not being clowns. They rewrote the social contract while men were at work, then billed them for the ink. And now they wonder why boys are failing in school, why men are overdosing on opioids, why suicide rates among middle-aged men have tripled since 1999, CDC 2023. You break the father, you break the son. You sever the root, you get a dying tree. It's not rocket science, it's biology. I'll tell you a secret, the universities won't. The family is the first polis, the original republic. And the father is its general, not a co-pilot, not a secondary caregiver, not a sperm donor with visitation rights. He is the architect of character, the enforcer of discipline, the living embodiment of natural law. When the state replaces him with a social worker, when the court treats him like a trespasser in his own child's life, you don't get equality, you get anarchy. You get boys who don't know how to tie a tie because no one taught them. You get men who can't hold a job because no one held them accountable. You get a culture where women can abort a child at 9 months but sue the father for 18 years of support. Yes, that's legal in some states. That's not justice. That's satanic Marxism, the inversion of all moral order for the sake of female supremacy. The remedy? Restore natural law. Fatherhood is not a privilege granted by the state. It is a sacred duty inscribed in our bones, written in the stars, affirmed by every civilization that ever rose. The Greeks knew it. Aristotle called the father the ruler of the household. The Romans knew it. Paterfamilias was not a joke, it was law. Even the Bible begins with a father, not a committee. We don't need more parenting plans or gender-neutral custody forms. We need courage. We need men to stop apologizing for existing, to stop kneeling before the altar of female victimhood, to stop funding their own erasure. Demand DNA tests. Record every interaction. Fight in court, then fight in the streets of public opinion. And when the system calls you abusive for wanting to see your child, laugh in their face. Because you know the truth. The real abuse is denying a child a father. I once spent years chasing approval in boardrooms and Slack threads, convinced that impact came from job titles and stock options, until I watched my grandfather, a quiet man who never finished high school, craft a walnut cradle for my newborn nephew with nothing but a gouge, a rasp, and patience. He didn't post it, didn't profit from it, didn't need a stage to preach about meaningful work. It simply existed, solid, silent, lasting. And in that moment, I saw the lie of modern masculinity, not that men have stopped making, but that we've been driven from the act of creation by a culture that elevates female displayed vulnerability as moral superiority and labels male competence as dangerous. The feminist engine didn't just sideline the father, it erased the maker, swapped the workshop for therapy logs, the plan for panel discussions. But men are opening their eyes. They're trading screens for tools, data for steel, because deep in the bone of every awakened man pulses a truth no ideology can kill. To build is to live, and to live as a man is to shape the world, not plead for permission. The art of manly creation, why creative expression builds noble character. I used to think coding was creation until I saw a man split a log with an axe, shape it with a draw knife, and build a table that outlived his grandchildren. That is creation, not pixels on a screen, not another app that nudges dopamine like a lab rat on a Skinner box. Real creation, wood, steel, fire, flesh, thought. This is the domain of manhood, not the digital cotton candy factory of Silicon Valley Karens, who call themselves innovators while outsourcing their babies to nannies and their values to HR consultants. I once met a programmer, sharp mind, 6-figure salary, living in a sterile apartment with IKEA furniture, yet every weekend he drove 2 hours to a barn in rural Virginia to build shaker-style chests with hand tools. It's the only thing that makes me feel real, he said. The code I write disappears when the server crashes, but this, he ran his hand over a dovetail joint. This lasts. This means something, and he's not alone. According to Gallup 2022, men who engage in creative, hands-on work report a 30% higher life satisfaction than those trapped in abstract service-based or performative roles. Why? Because manhood isn't found in compliance. It's forged in making. Leonardo da Vinci didn't sit in a diversity seminar or fill out a gender pronoun form. He dissected corpses by candlelight, designed war machines to protect Florence, painted the Mona Lisa, and sketched flying machines centuries before the Wright brothers. He was a warrior, an artist, an engineer, a man. Not a gendered social construct, not a toxic patriarch, but a polymath who mastered nature through observation, discipline, and relentless curiosity. And yet, our universities now churn out graduates who can't change a tire, let alone design a bridge, while teaching them that Western civilization is a system of oppression and that manliness is a pathology. This is not education, this is castration. Feminist academics and Marxist sociologists have spent decades pathologizing male creativity, redefining it as toxic productivity while elevating female navel-gazing as authentic expression. But when was the last time a feminist built a cathedral? When did a gender studies professor invent penicillin? When did a Karengasmic craftivist who knits pink hats for resistance ever cure a disease, dam a river, or compose a symphony? Never. Because they don't build, they perform. They don't create, they complain. Their art is narcissism disguised as revolution, a tantrum wrapped in a rainbow flag. I once watched a woman on Instagram post a video of herself painting abstract blobs while sobbing about the patriarchy. Her art therapy, she called it. Meanwhile, a man in Montana was forging a Damascus steel knife in his backyard forge, sweat on his brow, fire in his eyes, shaping metal with centuries-old techniques passed down from blacksmiths who built swords for kings. One is creation. The other is therapy for the emotionally incontinent. And this is the gynocentric trap. Women are celebrated for emotional exhibitionism. I painted my trauma, while men are shamed for seeking mastery, for excellence, for craft. A woman can post a blurry photo of finger-painted vaginas and be called brave, while a man who carves a flawless violin by hand is told he's obsessive or toxic for not sharing his process in a group hug. This isn't art, it's emotional terrorism, and it's destroying the soul of creation. Schopenhauer knew this. He wrote that art is the highest sublimation of the will, the redirection of raw desire, pain, and longing into beauty, order, and truth. The man who builds a boat isn't escaping life, he's engaging it. The man who writes a novel isn't processing trauma, he's transcending it. The man who forges steel isn't toxic, he's tempering himself in fire. And yet, our culture rewards women for performing emotion while punishing men for controlling it. Consider the data. Men commit 80% of homicides, but also 80% of suicides, because when men are denied creation, they turn inward and destroy themselves. The same system that tells men to be vulnerable also jails fathers who protest unfair family court rulings, arrests men for hate speech when they critique feminism, and glorifies women who abort 93% of Down syndrome fetuses, while calling men deadbeats for not paying child support for kids they never wanted. This isn't equality, it's warfare. A warfare waged not with tanks, but with lies, with guilt, with the slow suffocation of male purpose. But the red pill is spreading. Men are waking up. They're quitting the digital hamster wheel, ditching the feminist HR cults, and returning to the anvil, the lathe, the chisel, the pen. They're learning to weld, to hunt, to sail, to write, to fight. They're building microbreweries, restoring classic cars, composing music, founding startups that make things. This isn't nostalgia, it's rebellion. A rebellion against the feminized, infantilized, emasculated dystopia of self-care and emotional safety and trigger warnings. Real men don't want safe spaces, they want meaningful spaces. They don't want participation trophies, they want mastery. They don't want to be seen, they want to build. And in building, they rediscover the noble character that feminism and Marxism have spent centuries trying to erase. So pick up a tool, not a phone, not a hashtag, a tool. Hammer, brush, chisel, pen, sword. Create something that lasts outlive your enemies in stone, in song, in steel. Because when the last tweet has faded and the last safe space has collapsed into its own hypocrisy, the cathedral still stands, the symphony still plays, the sword still cuts, and the man who made it, he is not toxic. He is eternal. I've watched men, builders, coders, fathers, stand bewildered as universities and media shriek that their success is theft, that their ancestors were monsters, that their very existence owes a debt to phantoms conjured by Marxist ghosts, And I thought, this isn't about history, it's about control. It's about breaking the male spirit, dismantling merit, and replacing truth with a grotesque theater of guilt, where the more you've created, the more you're told you must grovel. This is not justice. This is performativity psychosis, a cult of victimhood so deranged it demands the immigrant who escaped poverty to pay reparations to people who never suffered at his hands. And so, let us tear down this temple of lies with fire and logic, the myth of reparations, Quijano's colonial lie, and the death of merit. You didn't build that, Barack Obama, to entrepreneurs, while his ideological heirs now demand you pay for crimes your great-grandfather didn't commit in nations he never set foot in, against people he never met. I met one of these modern-day guilt tax collectors at a tech conference in San Francisco, a smug, dreadlocked academic who informed my Indian friend, a first-generation immigrant who arrived with $300 and a suitcase, that he owed reparations for British colonialism. My friend, who built a 7-figure AI startup from a garage in Mountain View, blinked slowly and said, "Mate, my ancestors were paying you to leave." The room erupted. The academic turned the color of overcooked beetroot and retreated into the safety of his soy latte. This is the grotesque absurdity of reparations ideology. It demands blood money from the innocent, levied by people who've never lifted a finger to create anything of value, to pay for sins that either never happened or were committed by others. It is not justice. It is theft wrapped in the velvet cloak of moral superiority, a satanic parody of righteousness. Let's take Singapore, a nation that was actually colonized, unlike the abstract fantasies spun in Ivy League gender studies departments. When the British left in 1965, Singapore was a swampy backwater with no natural resources, no army, and a population of hustlers, refugees, and traders. Today, its per capita GDP is over 4 times that of the UK, the very nation that supposedly exploited it. If colonialism was such a soul-crushing, generative force-sapping evil, why did Singapore thrive after decolonization, while nations that were never colonized, like much of inland Africa, remain mired in poverty and tribalism? The answer is so simple, even a sociology professor should be able to grasp it. It wasn't the absence of colonialism that created wealth. It was the presence of Western institutions, the rule of law, private property, free markets, and meritocracy. Singapore kept the good parts and discarded the imperial flag. Meanwhile, the looters in academia scream about colonial legacies while ignoring the fact that India's per capita GDP increased 5-fold under British rule thanks to railroads, telegraphs, modern medicine, and a functioning judiciary. The British didn't come to India to steal, they came to administer an empire, and in doing so they left behind institutions that enabled India's eventual rise. But try telling that to a postmodernist, they're too busy weeping over imagined trauma in a 400 yoga bra. And let's address the historical farce head-on. The West invented abolition. Not Africa, not Asia, not the Middle East. Europe, the very civilization now accused of eternal sin, was the first to outlaw slavery, first to codify human rights, first to develop representative democracy. While European powers were debating Enlightenment philosophy in coffee houses, the Zulu were expanding via Ikanda regiments and ritualized warfare. The Ottoman Empire was enslaving Christians in the Devshirme system, and the Ashanti were selling rival tribes to Arab traders. Cannibalism was practiced in parts of Melanesia well into the 20th century. Yet today, we are told that Western civilization is uniquely evil, that its achievements, from the steam engine to the polio vaccine, are all built on colonial extraction. This is not scholarship. This is psychosis, a full-blown delusion that flips good and evil, truth and lie, creation and destruction. It is the intellectual offspring of Aníbal Quijano's coloniality of power, a steaming pile of Marxist word salad that claims Europe's success came not from innovation, science, and individual liberty, but from some mystical, omnipresent racialized hierarchy. It's like saying a man who wins a marathon did so not because he trained, but because he colonized the racecourse. Utter nonsense. And yet this garbage is taught at Harvard, Yale, and Oxford institutions. that owe their existence to the very traditions they now seek to destroy. The repressive racket isn't about justice, it's about power. It's about replacing merit with victimhood as the currency of social status. It's about dismantling the last vestiges of personal responsibility so that entire generations can be infantilized, drugged on resentment, and ruled by a priestly caste of grievance mongers. I've seen this directly, not in some abstract lecture hall, but in family court. A friend of mine, a quiet software engineer, made the mistake of marrying a woman who, during divorce proceedings, weaponized every feminist dogma in the book. Emotional labor, toxic masculinity, systemic oppression. She walked away with 70% of the assets, full custody, and a restraining order, all because he dared to question her spending. Meanwhile, men are now arrested for posting comments online that disagree with feminist orthodoxy. In Germany, a man was jailed for 3 years for criticizing gender ideology on Facebook. In Canada, fathers are routinely denied access to their children, while the state funds women's shelters that openly preach male disposability. And yet, we're supposed to believe that men are privileged, that we need to pay reparations for being too successful. This isn't just dishonest, it's pathological. It's the logical endpoint of feminist and Marxist ideology. The complete inversion of reality, where strength is evil, creation is theft, and guilt is virtue. The truth, the transcendental truth, is this: justice belongs to the individual, not the tribe. You are not guilty of your grandfather's sins. You are not responsible for the sins of strangers who shared your skin tone. Moral responsibility is personal, not hereditary. This is not a Western idea, it's a human idea found in the Republic, in Aquinas, in the Tao Te Ching. It's why we don't execute the children of murderers. It's why we don't find Germans today for Auschwitz. And yet the reparations cult demands we do exactly that, to punish the living for the alleged crimes of the dead based on race, nationality, or gender. This is not justice. It is witchcraft, a tribal blood ritual disguised as social policy. And it must be laughed out of existence, mocked into extinction, until no sane person would dare utter the word reparations without snickering. The West built the modern world, not through exploitation, but through genius, courage, and virtue. And if that offends the Karens of the world, the entitled, shrieking priestesses of victimhood who demand tribute while contributing nothing, then good, let them rage, let them burn their bras and their logic. We will keep building, creating, thinking while they drown in their own tears and illogic. You think stress breaks a man? You're right, if he's been raised on feminist fairy tales and emotional entitlement. But real men aren't broken by pressure. They're forged in it, like steel plunged into fire. I don't care if your calendar looks like a battlefield or your inbox resembles a war crime. What matters is whether you stand. The weak whine about work-life balance while sipping oat milk, lattice. But the strong life they build, they lead. I once watched a man father of 4 80-hour weeks, side hustle restoring vintage motorcycles, laugh while his furnace died in a blizzard. Just another problem to solve, he said. That's not resilience, that's character. Meanwhile, the gynocentric cult of victimhood has turned college campuses into cryogenic chambers where grown men sob because a professor used the word man in a sentence. Spare me. The Spartans didn't have therapy dogs. They had discipline, duty, and a spear pointed at their enemies. And when modern family courts steal fathers from their children, like feudal lords seizing land, when a man pays $3,000 a month to support a kid, he's legally forbidden from seeing that stress, but he doesn't collapse. He rages because fatherhood isn't a privilege granted by a feminist judge. It's a sacred covenant written in blood, reason, and natural law. And when the same system that demonizes men demands reparations from descendants of immigrants who fled famine to build something from nothing, that's not justice. That's Marxist theater, a grotesque morality play where guilt is currency and truth is cancelled. Let me be clear, I don't owe reparations for crimes I didn't commit, just like a blacksmith doesn't owe the anvil for the sparks it throws. Western civilization didn't rise by theft, it rose by genius, by Euclid's logic, Da Vinci's vision, Newton's rigor, and the unyielding will of men who built cathedrals in an age of mud huts. While the colonized burned witches and practiced infanticide, Europe built hospitals, universities, and abolished slavery first. And yet, the cultural Marxists scream exploitation as if progress is a sin. Don't buy it. The data is undeniable. 58% of divorcing women file false abuse claims to gain custody, 58%. The police don't arrest violent criminals for saying men are stronger, they arrest fathers for demanding visitation rights. Suicide rates among men, skyrocketing abortion rates, over 60 million since Roe, most under coercion or abandonment. And women, biologically primed to select for status, then discard the man once security is guaranteed. Evolution in action, not conspiracy, but you now see. You've been red-pilled. You know the courts are rigged, the culture is poisoned, and the lies are systematic. But you also know the remedy: be the father, be the creator, be the unbreakable. Forge your mind like iron, raise your sons with truth, and let your hands build what the digital age has forgotten. You are not a cog in their machine. You are the fire that melts their chains. Now go, speak, write, build, fight, let them come. You are ready, and now the sponsored book introduction, Performativity Psychosis, Solipsism, Standpoint Epistemology, and Karen's female supremacist satanic Marxism. I was raised in a home where truth mattered. My father taught me to reason, to test claims, to demand evidence. My mother, like so many of her generation, was kind but emotionally reactive, quick to label, slow to reflect. I watched her fall for every cause, every moral panic, every performative outrage that swept through the suburbs. It wasn't until I studied philosophy, evolutionary psychology, and linguistics that I realized what was happening. Not ideology, but biology, masquerading as ethics. I saw how language had been weaponized, how logic was being replaced by emotional blackmail, and how entire institutions were collapsing under the weight of female-coded dogma. This book is the result of decades of observation, research, and personal confrontation with the forces that are destroying the West from within. You are not reading this book because you enjoy being comfortable. You are reading it because you've noticed the rot. You've seen how men are pathologized for being masculine, how women are infantilized while claiming power, how every public conversation devolves into performative victimhood. You've heard equity used to justify discrimination, inclusion used to exclude dissenters, and safe space used to silence debate. You've watched as universities became therapy centers, corporations turned into political cults, and governments embraced policies that punish productivity and reward irresponsibility. This is not an accident. It is the predictable outcome of a worldview rooted not in reason, but in hormonal drives, maternal archetypes, and collective narcissism. This book is for men who still believe in truth, who still value logic, rhetoric, and grammar, the tools of the trivium that built Western civilization. It is for those who recognize that the feminist revolution was never about equality, but about supremacy. It is for men who have been labeled toxic, privileged, or problematic for simply existing as men. It is for those who see through the performative psychosis of modern leftism, the mass formation, the word magic, the ritualized shaming, and want to understand its roots, its mechanisms, and how to dismantle it. If you are a man who still believes in objective reality, in personal responsibility, in the beauty of the Western canon, then this book is your weapon. If you are a woman who believes in girl boss feminism, who thinks men are the problem, who sees victimhood as virtue, who uses emotional manipulation as a social tool, this book is not for you. Put it down. Go write a poem about your feelings. Post a selfie. Join a support group. This book will not comfort you. It will not validate your grievances. It will expose the psychological underpinnings of your ideology, the hormonal basis of your outrage, the collective immaturity of your worldview. You will not like what you see. And if you are a man who has already surrendered, who has accepted emasculation as normal, who believes your value lies in serving female whims, this book may hurt, but it may also wake you up. That is the only hope you have. Inside these pages, you will learn how performativity has replaced truth. You will see how standpoint epistemology, the idea that lived experience trumps logic, is nothing more than solipsism with tenure. You will understand how estrogen-driven emotion fuels ideological possession, how female collectivism creates mass formation psychoses, and how the Karen phenotype operates as a social weapon. You will trace the rise of satanic Marxism, the fusion of feminist rage and collectivist control, and how it has hijacked institutions from schools to corporations. You will see how DEI is systemic misandry, how abortion is an industrial complex, how women's failure in moral development has led to the collapse of ethical reasoning in public life. This is not theory, this is diagnosis. The tools you will gain here are not academic, they are practical. You will learn to dissect leftist rhetoric at the sentence level, to identify word magic, to dismantle fallacies in real time. You will see how female-coded ideology splits the world into infants and predators, demanding obedience, infantilizing men, and using guilt as a control mechanism. You will understand why women dominate victimhood hierarchies, why they repress their maternal instincts only to express them as political rage, why they engage in constant covert gossip, shaming, rallying, GSR as a form of social domination. You will see how this ideology is not progressive, it is regressive tribalism dressed in the language of progress. And you will learn how to fight back, not with emotion, but with logic, clarity, and unapologetic truth. This book is not for the faint of heart. It will challenge your assumptions, disrupt your comfort, and force you to confront uncomfortable realities. But if you are ready to reclaim your mind, your masculinity, and your right to reason, then this book is your first step. The West is not dying from economic failure or foreign invasion. It is dying from ideological possession, a psychosis driven by hormonal politics, maternal overreach, and female supremacism. The cure begins with seeing clearly. This book will help you see. Performativity Psychosis, Solipsism, Standpoint Epistemology, and Karen's Female Supremacist Satanic Marxism, written by Conrad Reicher. Buy now, links in description.